Hi there, Avian Science. So this was a more challenging Find That Lizard. I agree with Anna. There's a lot of lizard-shaped things. But as far as I know, there's only one lizard. Anybody know for sure where it is or confident in their guess? Kinda. That doesn't sound very confident. Okay, let's go to the next image. It's right there. Little tiny lizard right on the rock. I never promised you these would be easy. Were you looking at, I mean, this thing to me looks kind of lizard-like. Looks like there might be something lizard-like here, but no, that's the lizard. Little bitty guy. Okay. So as a reminder, there's nothing due this week. Wait, where was he, Laura? Right inside that little red circle right there. I will be putting up new assignments, hopefully tomorrow, since I had a week off from doing assignments for you guys. And I want to remind you that the project is due April 16th before midnight. Presentations will start Tuesday the 18th. Okay, so we've been talking about nutrition in birds. And we were discussing adding fruits and vegetables to the diet. I wanted to mention that I have created a module on Blackboard that I think it's entitled References, and it has links to 2 different avian veterinary sites that talk about what kinds of foods, people foods that are safe for birds and what might not be so safe, to kind of give you some ideas beyond just me being kind of vague up here. So if you want more details, that's a good place. I also put a couple of other links in there, and I will continue to do that if I come up with other links that I think you might find valuable. Anything in there is just for your information. It is not required reading. So just like people, birds are going to like a lot of variety in their food. And if you give them the same food every single day, they will get bored with it. However, don't try and overwhelm your bird with new foods that it's not familiar with. Your bird, especially if they haven't been getting fresh fruits and vegetables, legumes, nuts, and that kind of stuff, they probably won't recognize it as food and or might not be comfortable trying new things. If your bird gets used to you bringing new foods in, then they'll be more eager to try new things in the future. You want to do small changes. You don't want to take a bird who's eaten nothing but seed all of its life and all of a sudden give it a huge bowl of fruits and vegetables. A big change in the diet can bring on diarrhea. It can bring on constipation. The good news is the more diverse the diet is on a day-to-day basis, the less likely the bird is going to develop diarrhea or constipation when you introduce something different. So diversity as a consistent measure means that you can try new things a little bit easier with your bird. Whatever you do, do not starve your bird in an effort to get it to eat a new food. Birds can die within 48 hours if you don't feed them. So if your bird isn't eating the new food, you need to give it its old food, whatever that was. Seeds and nuts, these are pretty high in fat. They can be given as treats, as can small amounts of meat, pizza crust, try not to get the sauce, cooked pasta, and there's a couple of other people foods that can be given as a treat. Eggs are actually pretty good for birds. I know it sounds weird, but you can give your bird egg. You can even give it the egg shell, which is kind of surprising, but it is a good source of calcium for them. When you're feeding your bird, where do you feed your bird? So the type of bird you have in the wild will eat at different places in the environment. So the big parrots are gonna eat in the height from the ground doesn't matter. They'll eat in a wide variety of heights, but they would really like to eat communally. So if you're having dinner, they would love to have their dinner on the table as well. How feasible is that? Probably a lot depends on your ick factor and how well behaved your bird is, because I can just picture those parrots coming over and eating food off of your plate, which may have things in it that's not so good for the bird. Budgies are ground feeders. So they're going to like to be fed closer to the ground rather than high up. Lovebirds and conures tend to feed higher in the trees in the wild, so their bowls can be placed higher up. But again, this is an individual thing for birds. And what your lovebird prefers as far as height above the ground is going to be different than what somebody else's lovebird might prefer. And frankly, a lot of these birds are very flexible about this one, and it's not really much of an issue. But if your bird is a finicky eater, this is one of the things you can try, different heights above the ground. So what about vitamins? If your bird is on a seed diet, if you can't get it to transition to a pelleted diet, it is going to be short on certain vitamins. This means it's more important for birds on a seed diet to get some of those additional fresh fruits and vegetables in their diet to help bring in more mixes of vitamins. Vitamins sometimes break down, especially vitamin A. It tends to break down pretty quickly. If you've got a seed mix, you want to do a sprout test. What do I mean by this? You take some seeds from your seed mix, try and make sure you get several different kinds because it's a mix, it's not all the same type of seed. Put it on a damp paper towel, fold the top over, and it should sprout within 24, 36 hours. If it doesn't sprout by day 2, that means the seed is old and it's not very nutritious. So not a good option there. If you must supplement, and I recommend trying to get a diverse diet so you don't need to supplement. But if you are doing strictly seed and you feel like you need to supplement, your bird's a picky eater, use powdered vitamins, not liquid. And don't mix in the water. So some of these will say you can mix this with the water. I am getting to the why. Thank you for that. The why is because vitamins in a liquid form are more likely to grow bacteria. It's nutritious material for your bird. It's nutritious material for the bacteria. And if it's wet, that's just a great way to get bacteria and fungi growing in that liquid. So powdered is best. You can sprinkle it over maybe chopped up strawberries and then, give the bird like half an hour to eat the strawberries and then chuck it. That's okay, but you don't want to leave liquid vitamins in any form around. Supplementing with vitamins can be very, very tricky to get correct. I mentioned this at the beginning of this discussion. We do not have good species-specific nutrition studies. We don't have a recommended daily allowance for budgies for how much vitamin A they need versus a parrot versus chickens. We don't have that information. If you are supplementing, I always recommend that you use less than the amount recommended on the label. The amount that's recommended on the label, it may be a reasonable amount, but it may also be a little more than is necessary because the more you use, the more you buy. Companies are greedy. So I always recommend using a little bit less. Now, there is one thing which I forgot to grab. Give me just a second. All right. I'm gonna stop the share here. This is a cuttle bone, or it's part of a cuttle bone. This is an excellent source of calcium for your birds. This is something you should supplement. You should have a cuttle bone available to your birds. They also have mineral blocks, but cuttle bones are great. The thing with these is you have to make sure you're using the correct side. There are two different sides. This side, I don't know if you can tell, it's really hard and I scratch it and I don't get any powder under my nails. I scratch this side and I get lots of powder under my nails. That's the side that should be facing your bird. I actually don't have a bird. I use cuttle bone in my fish tanks. Yep, the smooth side is the soft side, the bumpy side is the hard side. Yep, that's exactly right. Okay. So you can see here's a full cuttle bone for this budgie right here. Budgies also need iodine. So if you've got a budgie specific pelleted diet, you're good. If not, you may want to use a mineral block that has iodine added to it. So they often have a diet low in iodine. This little gray rock stuff here is grit. None of the parrots, including budgies, need grit. Grit is kind of controversial. It has been recommended by some people. It has been said by other people, no, don't use it with any of your birds. The best up-to-date research that I could find says no grit. Here's what happens. Wild birds and chickens that run loose will eat small bits of gravel and rock and use that in their mechanical stomach to help break down the food physically. So they kind of use it to grind up food into smaller pieces. The problem is in captivity, if you've got this constantly available, if your bird is bored, if your bird is hungry, they might end up eating more grit than is good for them, and it can cause what's called compaction or impacted bowels. In birds, this is often not a survivable situation. So parrots don't need it at all. Finches and canaries, it's not clear if it's necessary for those guys, but a pinch of grit once every 2 months is enough. They don't need a lot of it. They just need a little tiny bit if they need it. And a pinch every 2 months is safe for all of the birds. Now I've been talking seed. Not every bird eats seed. So if we're talking about toucans, and people keep toucans as a pet, or lorikeets, these are not seed eaters. They shouldn't be fed the same pelleted diet that you would feed to a parrot, or other types of parrots, because lorikeets are in the parrot group. They need to be on a specialized diet, and there are some available. When we talk about toucans, their diet should be very high in fresh, diced fruit. So you can see the size of this piece of fruit right here. But they cannot tolerate citrus and they cannot tolerate tomatoes. But they are primarily a fruit eater. So that should be kind of the base of their diet. So it's going to be more expensive, more challenging to deal with. You're going to have to offer small amounts multiple times a day because you don't want this sitting around growing bacteria. So you've got to, be careful about that with these guys. The lorikeets need soft foods. They don't have the strength to open hard seeds and nuts. Their diet is often basically a liquid diet with some soft vegetables and fruits added. These guys are messier than other birds. They're messier than seed eaters. If you think about it, all birds fling their food around. They all do it. If their food is fruit, then that's fruit going everywhere. So you can picture that mess that you're going to get with all of this. That is why these are much more challenging and much less common in captivity, because they are very, very messy birds. And birds are messy, period. So when do you feed the bird? We've talked a little bit about this when we talked about behavior, how you can give the bird breakfast when you first wake up in the morning so that it doesn't start screaming to greet the dawn, and using preferred foods to convince the bird to go back to bed in the cage at night. In general, and this again depends on the individual bird, pellets or seeds should be available most or all of the time. Now, here's the thing. Birds are like people. They will eat too much. Just like dogs will eat too much, cats will eat too much, horses will eat too much. Yeah, pretty much a lot of animals will eat too much. If you have a bird that is eating too much seed or pellets and they have gained weight, especially those Amazon parrots, they're very, very commonly gain excess weight. You may have to break it down into multiple smaller meals a day and not have seed or pellets available all day. So you may have to put a little bit in the morning, a little bit in like 10 o'clock, lunchtime, mid-afternoon, dinner time, doing that kind of thing. How frequently depends on the size of your bird. Smaller birds need to feed more frequently, and the finches and the canaries, those guys need to feed pretty darn frequently. Any liquid food, this includes veggies, fruits, the liquid diets that you feed lorikeets, the fruit that you feed toucans, anything wet needs to be replaced every 4 hours. So they shouldn't have access to wet food for more than 4 hours. And when you replace it, you should chuck out the old. Again, bacteria, bacteria, bacteria. We're trying to reduce the bacteria. Birds that eat primarily pellets or seeds, fruits and veggies, first thing in the morning, right when they're going to bed. Not only because it helps with behavior issues, but also because birds are naturally more active at these times of the day. Some, in fact, quite a lot of bird keepers will make what's called birdie bread. So it's a multi-grain bread. I'm sure there are tons of recipes out there for what to add into it, how to make it. Birds tend to love this stuff. So if you like to bake, just, get a recipe, make sure all the ingredients are bird safe, and make your bird happy. You don't want to use grocery store bought bread because it's going to have different things included in it that may not be good for your bird. This is the kind of thing that if you want to give your bird birdie bread, you need to make it yourself. Your dishes need to be washed daily. So this is where the best way to do this is to have multiple sets. So you can wash them with soap and water in the sink or throw them in the dishwasher. That's fine. It doesn't matter. One of the things that I do with our cats, I went to a secondhand store and I bought a bunch of saucers for teacups, because people buy teacups for various reasons and they don't always buy the saucers. So I've got a whole bunch of these little teacup saucers. They're the perfect size to feed my cats. You can do the same kind of thing with your bird. You don't have to have fancy special dishes. Water, clean water at all times, day and night. This can be challenging because sometimes birds will decide to take baths in their water bowl. Sometimes they will poop in their water bowl. They will dunk food in their water bowl. If you've got an intelligent bird that's bored, they will do all kinds of things in their water bowl. They'll put their toys in there. If you've got newspaper on the bottom of the cage, they'll tear up strips and put that in their water bowl. So you may have to change those out multiple times a day. Okay. So you need to monitor, to keep an eye on how much your bird eats every day. You want to make sure that the amount that they're eating does not change dramatically. If they're suddenly eating a lot less, that is something to be worried about. If they're suddenly eating a lot more, that's a little less worrisome, but it still could be a sign that there's a problem. Ideally, you will use a scale to monitor the weight. This is a scale that's designed specifically to weigh birds. Okay, not really. It's probably a kitchen scale, but somebody has made this little triangular perch that fits very nicely on this scale. And this is probably just a kitchen scale. It's very easy to just monitor your bird if you can convince them to stand still. So you don't even have to do any math with scales. Scales these days have something called a tear button. And what you do is you take whatever your bird will perch on, whatever kind of perch you've got, put it on top of the scale, hit the tear button, or turn it off and turn it back on, either one, and it will come up as 0. And that means that when you have your bird step on it, you're only getting the weight of the bird. It's not counting the weight of whatever you set on it before you hit that tear button. Write down the bird's weight, or put it in your phone, whatever, however you can keep track of it. Okay. The size of the scale you need, no surprise here, depends on the size of the bird. You can buy generic scales off of Amazon, restaurant supplies places. You may be able to find them in Targets. Don't get one that's designed for birds. That's going to be more expensive than just buying a generic kitchen type scale. Now, there is another method of getting a rough estimate, and I want to emphasize this, a rough estimate of a bird's weight. You don't want to do this with a pet bird that you can weigh all of the time, but if you get a new bird, or if you're considering getting a new bird, this is one of the things that you can look at. So remember how that the breastbone forms that T structure, the keel, and you've got muscles attached on both sides of the keel. If you feel the bird's breast, you should feel a nice, smooth curve. So it should be nice and smooth, rounded curve. You might be able to feel a little tiny solid structure, the breastbone itself, the keel itself, right in the center. That's healthy. If the breast muscles and fat, let's be honest, this is going to be fat, if they stick forward, they're going to indent in the middle where the keel is. If they bulge forward on either side of the keel, that's a fat bird. If they are more V-shaped in the front rather than a nice rounded curve, if the keel is much sharper, that's a sign that the bird is too thin. This will help you feel a rough estimate for that bird. It is not a good way to constantly monitor the weight, because you are not able to tell as small of a difference with this technique as you would if you actually just weighed the bird. And again, we're looking for changes in the weight. But this, like I said, rough estimate of too fat, too thin, or somewhere in the normal range. If you've ever, you guys have probably seen those images that they use in vets' offices where they look at, I'm going to get to your question in a second, Anna, where they look at the shape of a dog or a cat. The rule of thumb with dogs and cats for most breeds is you should be able to feel the rib cage but not see it. That's kind of the level of detail that this feeling the keel is for birds. How much weight loss gain should be a concern? Oof, that is a good question. So it's a hard question to answer because the weight gain or loss amount is going to be different for different species. So let me look something up real quick. So let's say you've got an Amazon parrot and it's a yellow-fronted Amazon parrot, and those tend to weigh 380 to 480 grams. Now, I know we're Americans, we don't learn the metric system. Just go with me here. Grams is a much better, more precise way to monitor the weight than trying to do it in pounds and ounces. So how much would I be concerned about for a bird that weighs about 380 to 480? I would say about 15 to 20 grams change over several weeks would be concerning. A lot of this is going to depend on your scale. What do I mean by that? Some scales are not consistent from day to day. I know a lot of people notice this. If they weigh themselves, they'll go, I weighed myself at night and I weighed 132 pounds, and then I got up in the morning and weighed 135. How did that happen? That's your scales not being very consistent. So if your scale is not very consistent, larger fluctuations are okay. But in general, this is kind of what I would start being concerned about over a couple of weeks for this size bird. Smaller ones, you want smaller amounts. If we're talking about, yes, ideally you would weigh the bird at the same time in relation to meals, absolutely. Okay, so when I look it up, the weight on budgies, oh God, that's horrible. 1.1 ounces. So you can see why grams is better, because grams, it would be 25 to 60 grams. It's a little easier to see changes in the grams than in ounces. So for a budgie, if it's normally a 25 gram budgie, 2 grams is 10% of its body weight. And that would be where I would be calling the vet at that point. So I hope that.
So it's more about percentage than actual numbers.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. Big birds can afford to lose more weight without it being a big deal than small birds. Yeah. Okay, so there are some things you should never give your bird. And I'm going to type while I'm doing this. Avocado. Now, not all parts of the avocado are poisonous, we think, but because I'm not sure, and I don't know that anybody else is completely sure what part of the avocado is safe, let's just avoid that. Caffeine. So no coffee, no chocolate. Rhubarb, which is a vegetable. Sprouted lima beans. Other bean sprouts are good, but not sprouted lima beans. Or fava beans or navy beans. No alcohol. No dried beans, although if you cook dried beans, they're okay. Or if you get, well, yeah. Avoid fruit seeds. Again, some are going to be safe and some aren't. So let's just avoid them. Mushrooms and salt. So those are all things that you should avoid feeding your pet bird. And like I said, I posted links to a couple of vet sites that have probably more up-to-date and comprehensive information about things to avoid and things that are safe. Okay, so that's nutrition. Any questions on nutrition? All right, you guys are pretty good about asking questions when they come up. So the next big topic is diseases in pet birds. And I want to emphasize, or I want to give you the heads up. There are some unpleasant images in this presentation. I tried not to put the really nasty images. I found some that were a lot worse than what I'm going to show you guys. So, but there are some that are going to be distressing, and some of the topics that we discuss may be distressing. The most important thing to know about diseases in pet birds is prevention, prevention, prevention. So when we talk about the biggest contributors to poor health in birds, poor nutrition, poor quality, lack of diversity, overeating. Remember those Amazon parrots, they like to gain the weight. And new bird owners often don't feed enough because they don't recognize that seed hulls are not edible. So nutrition is a big one. Husbandry or cleanliness. Not cleaning the cage enough, not cleaning the bowls enough, not cleaning the water especially. This is going to increase the risk of both bacterial and fungal diseases. These can grow in that dirty water. They can grow in bird droppings. They can grow in wet foods. Chronic stresses. It's the same as with people. Chronic stress makes you more likely to get sick. Chronic stress reduces how effective your immune system functions, which means that it can lead to infection, but stress can also increase the risk of things like heart disease and cancers. The more stressful your life, the shorter your life expectancy generally. And the third category is inbreeding. So this increases the risk of species-specific problems. The big one is renal tumors in budgies. That's the big one that's seen with inbreeding. And again, if you're buying a bird from a large pet store chain, there's a higher risk that that individual is inbred.
Was that renal or?
Yes.
Is that what you said?
Yes, thank you. Okay. So I said this, I think at the very first meeting, birds are not dogs. Birds are not cats. Try and find somebody who is an avian vet, if possible. They get different diseases, they need different treatments. What works in dogs and cats may not work in birds. We've already talked about this. We've talked about some of these major anatomical differences in birds, things that might require different kinds of handling or treatment. Even something simple like a broken bone. In birds, the bones are hollow. We have to take that into consideration. So there's a lot of things that we need to be aware of here. we also need to talk about traditional versus alternative medicine. So some vets do both. Personally, I think traditional should be the first line of it should be your first option right there. Traditional medicine has been tested by time. It does have some limitations. We can't cure everything, but we know that what we're doing with traditional medicine is not going to cause harm. We know that it's going to treat the condition. It's really good, especially for things like broken bones, infections, cancers. Those are where you really want to go for traditional medicine. Some birds will have chronic issues. And this is where some types of alternative medicine are beneficial. Now, alternative medicine is a very broad spectrum, and some of it is absolute crap, and some of it is good. So it's tricky because we don't regulate alternative medicine the way we regulate traditional medicine, both for people and for vets. So you're kind of, it's a little bit risky because you don't know how educated that person practicing the alternative medicine is, how experienced, how educated, how much they know. But if we're talking about chronic issues, then things like nutrition, exercise, behavior, mental and physical stimulation, those would all kind of be considered, well, nutrition, well, is mostly, can be under traditional, but a lot of these other things, you know, you can get help for them with alternative treatments. So those are great. But again, things that work for dogs and cats can be toxic to birds. So things that you should absolutely avoid for birds. You want to avoid acupuncture. Remember, they have those little tiny air sacs around their body. If somebody's trying to do acupuncture on a bird and they don't know where those air sacs are, they can puncture an air sac. And that can lead to infection, that can lead to respiratory problems, depending on how big of a hole they put in that air sac. So definitely avoid that. And herbal medicines. Again, birds are not mammals, and what works in people or in dogs and cats can be toxic to birds. I don't think this is trendy anymore, but magnet-based therapies. Ronit, you've got your hand up? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I have a question about particularly cancer treatments. I know that, you know, they're massively stressful for any species, and we really don't know much about them to begin with. What is that like for birds, and is it usually more sort of mediation versus attempt to eradicate the cancer?
Really, I'm really glad you asked that. So with cancer treatments in animals, it is a very, very tough decision. And a lot of it depends on the type of cancer and the age of the animal. So there are certain types of cancers in birds that would be like just under the skin. And you might be able to remove them with surgery, and you might be able to give them some milder treatments for that cancer to prevent it from spreading. That would be okay. I wouldn't want a bird to go through serious chemotherapy. I think it would be hard for them to survive that. I don't know how well they do on chemotherapy. I'll be honest with you. I don't know a lot about that in birds. I know that in dogs, certain cancers, if you catch them earlier, you can put the dog on chemo for a short period of time, and it's not great, but it's not necessarily as horrible as a lot of chemos. So if it was okay, I've had animals with cancer. I've never had one where we caught it early enough to even try anything. Animals hide their pain. But if you caught something early, I might be willing to do something mild in a young animal. If I had a 14-year-old dog, forget it. No, I'm not going to put them through chemo, period. But that's very much a personal decision at that point. So I really can't give you a nice, concise little answer about birds. I would be the one standing there trying to pull information out of the vet. You know, how much is this going to stress the bird? How long is it going to go on? What's the survival rate? And have to make a decision from there.
How common is cancer in parrots?
We are actually going to mention that specifically. I think that's listed. It's going to be next week. Budgies commonly get renal cancer. That's pretty common in those guys. And I think, or renal tumors, which is a cancer. A lot of birds get lipomas, which you sometimes see similar things in dogs, fatty tumors under the skin. It's the same kind of thing in birds. Those are not considered cancer, however, and those are things that can be treated pretty easily. So those are the two common cancer-like conditions that I know for sure. Checking my brain, making sure that there's not a big exception that I can think of. All vertebrate animals get cancer at roughly similar rates.
Except I think naked mole rats. Thanks,
you might be right with that one. They're so weird.
I don't believe they exist.
I've seen them.
Oh, they're wild looking.
They are insane. I learned about those as an undergrad. My professor put a picture of one up and was talking about, it was an animal behavior class, and was talking about it. And he just kept referring to the way they looked, as they look like penises with teeth. I hope we're all
my dad's theory is that the only reason the species has continued is because they're blind.
Yeah, the queens are really ugly. You might be right there. I think I've heard that they don't tend to get cancer at the same rate as other things are. Sharks, despite the rumors, do get cancer. So my guess would be birds would be kind of at the same rate that other vertebrates. Okay, so I was saying things to avoid. Magnet therapies. Remember, we talked about how birds use magnetic fields to navigate so they can detect magnetic fields, I think magnets would be really annoying for birds. Anything copper can be toxic if eaten, so that should be avoided pretty much with any animal. You don't want them to ingest any of that toxin. Physical contact from a stranger should be kept to a minimum. So if a bird has broken its wing, it's going to need some stretching and some physical therapy after the injury. Ideally, the vet will show you how to do it, so you're doing it on your bird. Simple contact from a stranger can stress the bird out. So you really, really want to avoid that if possible. So bird's not going to enjoy a massage. So home healthcare. You should have a first aid kit that covers your pets, just like you have a first aid kit for you. Hopefully you have a first aid kit for you. What do you need? You need bird-specific supplies. How many times have I said this? What you use on dogs and cats and people may not be safe for birds. I've said it probably 6 times today. It's really important to remember that. So for birds, you want that restraint towel. You want cornstarch or something bird safe to stop bleeding. You want, for wounds, for physical damage, you want non-stick gauze pads and paper tape. Don't use regular types of tape. Tape is going to stick to the feathers. Paper tape comes off very easily, so that's fine. It's not going to damage the feathers. Other kinds of tape will really hurt those feathers. Betadine for wound cleaning. You want to be gentle when cleaning wounds. And you can put betadine on some gauze and dab it in the wound gently. That's fine. Tweezers, removing anything that might be in a wound. If you've learned how to pull blood feathers, small set of pliers to do that with. Don't try it on your own the first time. Saline, plain saline, can be used for both washing out eyes and also washing out wounds. You want an eyedropper or a syringe with no needle. This is often how you will get medication into your bird. It may be how you hydrate the bird if the bird is sick and not getting enough fluid. Again, you're going to have to be shown how to do this with the bird. If anything liquid, you should put it a little bit in the mouth and give the bird time to swallow. Now, if the bird really doesn't want the medicine, if you're opening the beak, you need to be careful. The beak is covered with living skin, and you don't want to be damaging that skin over the rest of the beak by trying to open the mouth. It can take 2 hands to medicate birds, depending on the bird and the condition. So if it's taking you 2 hands, who's holding the bird? Well, if you're lucky, you've got a friend who will do it. If you don't have a friend who will do it, you'll need to make a birdie burrito. Okay. Here's our bird.
Not to be confused with a chicken burrito.
Not to be confused with a chicken burrito, although if you do it with a chicken, this is the wrong size towel. I did not get all my props ready today. With this, you want to hold the wings against the body. Use the towel to wrap the bird, basically like you're wrapping a burrito, so that the towel is firmly but not tightly around the bird. So now you've got the bird roughly contained. So the tricky part is, and I cannot see my self view. Let's see if I can fix that. There we go. Okay. Oof. You guys are going to see that I'm wearing sweatshirts, sweatpants while I lecture. So you've got your bird and your burrito. You can hold it between your knees. Just like when you're restraining the bird, it's a gentle hold. You're just putting a little tiny bit of pressure on the wings to make sure the wings aren't flapping. And then you've got two hands free to open the beak and medicate. It's a tricky thing to do, but once you learn how to do it, it's great. I have done it on all kinds of birds. I've done it on hawks. I've done it on pelicans. When I worked in wildlife rehab, I was doing it all the time. And I was, don't mean to brag, but I was very, very good at it. I would also do it with small things, you know, crows. Easy to create a crow burrito. All right. Back to this guy. What else is useful in a first aid kit for birds? Pedialyte. Pedialyte is something that's sold for hydration among young children who are dehydrated. Works for birds, works for a lot of animals, and is perfectly safe. You're only going to give hydration to a bird that is awake. If the bird is not conscious, don't try and get any liquid in the bird. The last thing you want in your kit, emergency vet number and location. If your bird is bleeding and screaming and stressed out, you don't want to be scrambling to try and Google where the emergency vet is. So what do we define as an emergency? Well, it's gonna depend on a lot of different factors. So bleeding, if the bird is bleeding a lot, or you're having trouble stopping the bleeding, or it's a blood feather, you're going to want to go to the emergency vet. Bite wounds, especially if your cat bites your bird. So cat bites, even if it seems to be a minor bite, the bird needs to go to the vet. There are bacteria in cat saliva that can cause really bad infections in birds. So any bird that's been cat caught needs to go on antibiotics.
You too, humans too.
Yeah. It's not quite as urgent in humans. We're bigger. Burns. any kind of burns. So cooking, candles. If you're boiling water on the stove and the bird flies over the pot, the steam can burn them. So you want to be careful about these sorts of things around birds. In the case of burns, you want to cool the wound as soon as possible with cool water. Now, you don't want to chill the bird. So you don't want the bird to get really cold, but you want to cool down the spot that got burned. So what often happens is the bird gets too wet, it starts getting chilly, and you need to warm up the bird. I have the greatest trick in the world for cold birds. You get an old sock. You fill it with rice or beans, preferably rice. Tie it closed and microwave. Depending on your microwave, 30 seconds is often perfect. This is so much better than those hot hands things or the hot water bottles. The thing with the rice is it's reusable. You can use it for years, literally. If it cools off, it's not going to pull heat away from the bird. Warm water, when it gets cooler, will pull heat away from the bird. So a rice bag is an excellent, excellent alternative. What else do you need to go to the vet for? Poisoning. Do not attempt to induce vomiting or force the bird to drink anything unless the avian vet tells you this. And you want to use a pet-specific poison hotline. Don't use the same hotline poison control that is used for people, because birds and people are very, very different. If your bird is having difficulty breathing, take it to a vet. You can look in the beak and see if there's anything in the beak that's causing the problem. Birds do sometimes try and swallow things or tear up bits of toys and accidentally swallow it. Unlike mammals, unlike people, unlike dogs, unlike cat, the Heimlich maneuver does not work on birds. You can't squeeze their abdomen and get them to exhale out or dislodge something that they've swallowed. They don't have a diaphragm, so it's not going to work. You can try and gently turn the bird upside down and press on the keel. That might work, but regardless, even if it does dislodge something, take it to a vet. If the bird collapses, take it to a vet. If there are if there is blood in bird droppings, that is an emergency. If there's blood in your dog's droppings, it may or may not be an emergency, but in a bird, it is an emergency. If in doubt, call. The emergency vet will not complain about you calling and saying, do I need to bring the bird in? This little guy here, this is a mourning dove. And I want to show you something on this guy. Mourning doves, notice how there's no tail feathers except for that one. And mourning doves do something when they are distressed called an explosive molt. And basically, they can suddenly shed their tail feathers and a lot of the feathers on their back when they take off suddenly, in the hope that the predator will either go after the shed feathers, or if they've already grabbed the tail feathers, it's not going to catch the bird. So you'll often see adult mourning doves completely missing tail feathers. I had a hawk attack a mourning dove in my backyard recently. I think the mourning dove got away, but there were feathers everywhere after this. It was amazing to see because the bird just, it did look like the bird exploded. There were feathers just going everywhere. So, but
What
that's more,
effect does that have on the bird's ability to fly afterwards?
well, tail feathers are important for helping to keep lift and for maneuverability. Mourning doves generally prefer more open spaces, so they don't have to be quite as maneuverable. It's gonna make them less efficient in flying, but that's better than being caught. Okay. I love this guy. I have no idea who he is or where he is, but that's his bird ambulance. All right.
I don't know that I would want to put my bird on a pannier on a bicycle.
I suspect he's working with wild birds rather than domestics. Oftentimes, that's one of the big limitations in wildlife rehab is getting the animal to the rehabber. Because, you know, from where I am, the closest bird rehabber, it's an hour's drive. That's a long way to convince people to drive for a wild bird. All right. I think that's a good place to stop today, even though it's a few minutes early. We'll come back next time and continue talking about how to deal with emergencies. And then we'll start talking about some of the most common diseases in birds, what they're most likely to be, what is most likely to be seen in Massachusetts. We'll talk about zoonoses, and then I have added a section this year for the H5N1 highly pathogenic avian influenza, which is a massive pandemic that started last year and is still going on. So we might not get to that one till Thursday, but it is coming. Any questions? Nope. Okay.
There's a podcast that I love called This Podcast Will Kill You. It's
Oh,
an
I love that one.
epidemiology. But they just did an episode a couple months ago on sort of an update on the H5N1.
I'll have to go back and double check that. I usually listen to them when they come out.
What's it called?
It's called This Podcast Will Kill You.
Huh.
It's hosted by two epidemiologists.
Okay, that's interesting.
It's a very interesting podcast.
I always think like, I can't sleep. I always just listen to podcasts. Sometimes I always put me to sleep. I don't know why they just put me to sleep. Cool. All right. Have a
All
good weekend.
Have a good weekend, everybody. See you all on Tuesday.